Hi, Writer's Workout friends. Thanks so much for having me and listening to my presentation. I'm so excited to share with you what I know about preparing and submitting queries. And just to introduce myself a little bit, I'm a freelance editor. I work with most types of fiction and also with memoir. And I'm really passionate about helping new authors learn to navigate the publishing industry because it's a maze and it can be really mystifying at times. So I'm really excited to speak on queries with you today. So first, how do you know when your book is ready for querying? For both fiction and memoir, you need to have a finished, polished manuscript. Don't start querying until you have your book as pristine as possible. And for nonfiction, you can have a detailed outline, a few really solid sample chapters, and a clear idea of where your book fits in the marketplace, and also an idea of your platform, how you'll promote your book. And for either genre, you'll want alpha reads, which means getting a writer's perspective. That's often called critique partners. You'll want beta reads, someone who reads it when it's a little more polished and they read it from a writer's perspective. And you'll want some kind of professional editing. Usually this means developmental editing. This might also mean some line or copy editing, especially of those sample pages that you send in with your query. So how do you find agents and small publishers? For agents, the most complete database would be Query Tracker. There's a free option, but if you want some more data to go along as you're tracking your queries, you could certainly pay for the premium version, but for me personally, I feel like their free version covers most of what you need to learn and find in terms of agents. Manuscript Wishlist is an excellent resource. Many agents will put what they are looking for more specifically on Manuscript Wishlist. Sometimes if you go to their website, their agency's website, the details of what they're looking for might be a little bit spare, or it might not be as updated. And so a lot of the times, Manuscript Wishlist will have a little bit more complete view of the types of books that they like and the kinds of projects they're looking to work on. And also, don't underestimate the power of those acknowledgments in the back of your favorite books that are in your genre. Read them, look through them, pay attention to who the agents are, pay attention to the publishers that you see on the spine of your book. And that ties into small publishers as well. Pay attention to who is publishing what. And Readsy list for small publishers, you can get on Readsy, and they have a pretty good database of publishers, and you can do different filters for if you want to just look at sci-fi, or if you just want to look at children's, or if you just want to look at mid-size or just small presses. So they have all types of ways to customize your search. There's also some other lists online that you can look at as well. I should have put this on here, but I want to mention Publishers Marketplace as well. That one, the features on Publishers Marketplace are a little bit harder to access if you don't have a paid membership, but it does have, if you're hoping for a traditional publishing deal, that's where you're going to find really up-to-date information on what the agents are doing in their business. So Publishers Marketplace should have been on this slide. Now let's talk about what you submit to agents and or publishing companies. Usually for fiction and usually memoir, you'll submit a query letter, a synopsis, and sample pages, usually between 10 to 20 pages, or they might ask for a specific word count. And we'll talk about each of those things in depth in the next few slides. For a nonfiction proposal, you'll want sample chapters, in an in-depth outline of the whole book, chapter by chapter usually, a comp title analysis where you'll show what other books have been written already that address your topic or address topics adjacent to it, or that follow the sort of format that your book follows, if your book is a little unique. And also, the comp title analysis should identify what your book adds to the nonfiction sphere that you are writing in. And then your marketing plan, what resources do you have to promote your book yourself? Do you know podcasters, or are you friendly with local news organizations or with libraries or bookstores? That kind of thing. So let's talk more about the query letter. The length should be around 300 to 400 words, or one page, single spaced in 12-point font. You really don't want it to go longer than one page, if at all possible. It includes an intro to the book, and it can also include some personalization if you want to respond to something you see that the agent or editor wants on their wish list, and you feel like your book meets that really specifically. You can bring that up, but you could also leave the personalization out. It's really kind of up to you and how much work you want to put into that personalization, because in order to pull it off, you really do need to make it tailored to each agent or editor. You'll include your title in all caps and your word count rounded to the nearest 1,000. And you'll have your comp titles. Rule of thumb here with comp titles is no more than 3 to 5 years old. That can be a little tricky, but really they just want to see that you know what's going on in your genre and that you understand where you fit in your genre currently. So really difficult to get right sometimes, but also really important to make sure you're finding good comp titles. Your blurb is the most important part of your query letter. It includes, what what makes your book interesting, or the hook. Introduces your main character and some of the side characters. I've heard that around 3 characters is about as many as you can reasonably introduce in a query. And talks about what problems they have and what's at stake if they don't solve those problems. And we'll talk in a minute about some of the don'ts of querying, but one of the things that is the hardest to do in writing a blurb is talking in vague terms. So, phrasing like everything is at stake, or relationships fracture, or she will lose everything. Really those sweeping generalities that could be applied to almost any story you want to avoid at all costs. You want to be as specific as possible. And then you want to include a short but relevant bio. Keyword relevant. If you have educational background that shows that you are, a serious writer, or publication credits, or if you have a professional background that directly relates to your book. For example, if you're a forensic scientist and your book is about a forensic scientist or incorporates forensic science, use that to make your case as to why you are the person to tell a story. You can also use this to kind of signal if you belong to a specific community that you're writing about. So that's a good thing to do in your query, is to show why you are the authority on this book. So let's talk more about the blurb. I think one of the most helpful things is to get a lot of feedback on the blurb and also the query letter as a whole from other writers. Don't rush the revision process. Because it's so difficult to do, it can take a lot of iterations to land on a really effective query letter. And might send out a query letter to one batch of agents and you don't get any feedback or any requests. And so then, you might go back to the drawing board and redo your query or tweak it or find more feedback to see what is missing. But it's really important to take your time and get this right, because really you have one shot. Oh, I need to go back. I can't go back. Well, I'm going to talk about the blurb just a little bit more before I go on. One thing that is really difficult with blurbs is, you have to establish, who the story is about. You have to establish why we care about the character or about the situation they're in. You have to establish what is interesting about what they're dealing with, and you want to be specific. One thing that is an automatic turnoff for agents and editors is a blurb that deals in generalities rather than specific details. So, phrases like life and death situation, or the character will lose everything, or tensions will be heightened, or just really generalized, like they could apply to almost any story. You really want to stay away from those as much as possible. And while it might be a little bit scary to think about, well, what if I'm giving away too much in my story? It's better to err on the side of giving away a little too much than wading into non-specific territory with your query. And that blurb should probably take you through, in terms of like the arc of your story, take you through like the kind of the first act and a little bit into the second at the most, as you're setting up your story. Don't give away things that are really in your third act. So now let's go to writing a synopsis. A synopsis is basically a straightforward telling, not showing, of each major event in the story. It's written in third person present tense. Each agent has a slightly different length requirement, and that's one of those hoops you have to jump through as you're querying. So at minimum, you're likely going to have to prepare both a 2-page and a 1-page version. And that's double spaced. And sometimes they'll ask for a 3-page. And, it's such a pain because, at first it's like, how can I tell my entire story and everything that happens in 3 pages? And then you do that and it feels, like a huge accomplishment. And then you go look at another agent's guidelines and they ask for 1 page. And it's like, oh my goodness, how am I going to get this down to 1 page? And it's hard, but it is one of their ways to see, can this author follow instructions exactly? Can they be flexible and work with the boundaries that are set? So while, yes, it's really hard and synopses are not fun to write, they're pretty boring, really. It's kind of a test of your ability to meet those expectations. And then with your sample pages that you submit with your query package, whether that is for nonfiction or fiction, polish, polish, polish. You want this to be the best it possibly can be. Make sure the hook or the inciting incident is crystal clear. Make sure your character development is really well defined, and we kind of get a sense of who your protagonist is right from the start. Avoid info dumps. That is so hard to do when you're building a world, especially in fantasy or historical or sci-fi fiction. It's you don't want to pause your narrative to give information to the reader, at least not longer than 1 or 2 sentences. You want all that info that you need to work in about whatever world you're building to feel organic, and to come at just the right moment. And even if you think your opening pages are already strong, get feedback on it, and then revise, and then get feedback again, and then revise, and seek out the most experienced sources possible, whether that's a critique group member who has been doing this for a while, an author who has successfully queried and gotten good responses. An editor who looks at just your query package or your sample pages. Whatever you can do to really make sure that that these pages glow, because like with the blurb, it's your one shot. So yeah, it's kind of all writing on these, on both the query letter and the sample pages. So some red flags that you want to watch out for in your query letters, that will automatically tip an agent off that this is probably not the right project for them. If your word count is too low or too high, it might be kind of frustrating to have to make your book meet what is a standard word count for your genre. But it's a way to communicate to the agent whether you can play by the expectations of the industry. If your word count is much too low, they're going to think your book is not developed enough. If it's much too high, they're going to think, whoa, this person cannot self-edit and they don't know what story they want to tell. Another red flag, comp titles that are decades out of date or too ambitious. Don't be comparing yourself to Stephen King or J.K. Rowling, because chances are that's not going to be you. And also, like we talked about before, the blurb using vague language. Again, you want to be as specific to your story as possible. If you're pitching a series, that can get a little complicated. On the one hand, a series can represent a greater revenue opportunity for agents and publishers if it does well. On the other hand, it can represent greater risk because if a publisher has contracted with you to publish more than one book and the first book doesn't do well, then that's definitely something they want to avoid at all costs. So I recommend, and I've seen this recommended in many places, it's preferable to pitch a standalone book with series potential, or to pitch a very short series, like 2 books, maybe 3 books. And if you are trying to find a publisher or an agent for a second or third or subsequent book in a series, that will be definitely a hard sell. They don't usually pick up much interest just because they've already been put out there, and it can be hard for a publisher to really know what to do. So watch out for that as well. Some querying don'ts. Don't write a long query letter. Like we've already talked about, try at all costs to stick to that 1 page, maybe 1.5. For some cases. Don't ignore any formatting or submission requirements, because this will likely automatically put you in the rejection pile. Again, it's a way of gatekeeping, and while it can feel really onerous to have to have like, okay, for this agent I have to paste my first 5 pages, and the other person wants 10 pages, and this person wants 50 pages, or even with the query, like trying to personalize or not personalize, or with the synopsis, making sure you're meeting their page length requirement. It's hard, but it's necessary to really make sure you are meeting their expectations and requirements to a T. Also, don't attack the agent or the industry. You can go on some agent social media accounts and or go to agents workshops at conferences, and you will hear some horror stories from people who are frustrated that they're not getting more attention, and they kind of go off on either the agent themselves or on the industry, and that's just not attractive. Don't do it. Don't spam every agent you can find. Be thoughtful about who you query. It takes a lot of research, but you'll burn a lot less bridges that way, and you'll probably get a higher response rate that way if you are putting in that time to research. And also don't be egotistical. That kind of goes with the don't attack the agent. Don't tell them that this is the best book and it will sell 100,000 or 1,000,000 copies. Don't tell them that if they don't publish your book, they're going to miss out on a huge opportunity that will make their career. So just be humble. Just present your case, and don't attach that sort of emotional. Don't try to do that sort of emotional manipulation in your query. Dealing with rejection, it will happen many, 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 many times. Even after you're published, it's going to happen. It really sucks. But to win this crazy game we call publishing, you have to build up a really high tolerance for rejection and personalized rejection. If you get an agent that emails you back and says, hey, I was really attracted by your query in your premise of your book because of XYZ, or I really loved how the character was this, or I really was intrigued by this concept. If they're giving you specific feedback about what they liked, but also what they didn't like, that is a huge win, and that shows that you were on the right track with your book. And it can be a little tricky sometimes to know when a rejection is personalized and when it isn't, because usually a standard rejection is what you'll get, and they're very nice, most of them. They'll say, I'm afraid this isn't a good fit for me, or they'll say, I was intrigued by your premise, but it's not quite for my list, and please consider querying other agents. They'll be very polite to you. But it's most of the time it's a form rejection. If they give you specifics about your book, if they say specifically why they passed, then celebrate, because that's a good thing, and then take their feedback into consideration. Rework your query, rework your sample pages if you feel like that is true and that will really benefit you in your book. Then that's the takeaway from those personalized rejections. More about rejection. Know when to consider revising your query, your whole query package, whether that's your pages or your synopsis or your query letter. Maybe you want to decide on a number of queries to send out at one time. And this varies, from person to person. I've maybe been personally in my querying experience, I've maybe gone too high with my numbers. I've done like 20 at a time, but I know a lot of writers will do like 5 or 10 at a time, and then they'll revise and try again. But just decide on a number that works for you, and do that. You can also create like different tiers, like this is my A-list agent, this is my B-list agent, and then see what happens. But if you get nothing but form rejections from more than 1 or 2 rounds, you should really consider revising, especially if you're doing your research on the agents and publishers. If you feel like they're really strong matches and they are still not requesting the full manuscript, then something's off, something's missing, something's causing them to say no. Also, don't get stuck on this one project. Start something new. Have something up your sleeve in the works. Something else to occupy your mind with. You don't want to spend, now that you've written this book, you don't have to spend all your energy on finding this book, an editor or an agent, because it might not happen. And so, work on something else, because it could be the next thing that is going to be the one that gets you into the publishing industry. This is one of the questions that came up, finding balance to avoid draining time and energy. Like I said, query, like this is a lot of work. It is a lot of really stressful, boring, not very exciting work. And it can easily take over your life if you're not careful. So my recommendations are: schedule time for researching agents and sending queries. And when that time's up, it's up. And then, maybe you do that once a week or once a month or whatever, and then you leave it until the next time. Keep copies of every query package iteration, especially your synopses. Like I said, they vary so much in length, and you don't want to lose your 2-page synopsis only to find that you need it 4 or 5 queries down the road. Organize queries through spreadsheets or through Query Tracker. That's pretty easy to do. And then send it and forget it. In most cases, agents will take 4 to 8 weeks to respond, sometimes longer. Many of them could be shorter, especially if they're a little bit newer and their inboxes are a little bit less full, or you just catch them at a good time. But just send it and then do other things. Don't keep hitting refresh on your inbox, because that just leads to a lot of unnecessary anxiety and energy drain. Here are some resources for improving your query packages. Learn by reading lots of other query letters and hearing professional feedback on them. QueryShark.com is a great website. There's professional breakdowns of why a query isn't working. Also, this podcast, I'm not going to say the whole name, but that each podcast here starts with a 30-minute query review session, where I think they usually do 2 queries and sample pages, and it's a roundtable of agents. And it's really awesome to get that in-depth feedback on what authors are doing right and what is not so effective about their queries. Take opportunities to learn from agents, find out what they like in queries and what they don't like, learn about what gets their attention, and you can do this through conferences. The Manuscript Academy podcast is another great resource. Also, just paying attention to their social media pages is also helpful. You can get professional feedback on your query package through panels at conferences or hiring freelance editing and publishing professionals. I have some questions from you. How has the submissions and querying process changed over recent years? It's, if anything, like the competition just gets stiffer and stiffer every year. Another thing, this is kind of a mechanical thing, but instead of emailing agents directly, most of them have you submit through Query Manager, which on one hand is kind of nice, but on the other hand, it's a little bit tricky for formatting purposes. Like when you paste your text for your sample pages, it'll often take out all the italics or some of the special formatting, and so you might need to go in and fix that manually. Would other publishing credits, such as short stories, add credibility to my bio and make agents pay more attention? Yes, it could. Publishing anything shows that you're serious about writing, but the credibility depends on the publication. And also consider getting short stories published by a well-respected publication also takes so much time and energy. And so you have to weigh if that spending energy on that will in the end really benefit your querying efforts. If I find a small press that wants to acquire my manuscript, should I then go find an agent to help me negotiate them? In 99% of the cases, if you want an agent to help with anything, and that likely means you are querying, you're interested in being represented by big 5 publishers or mid-size publishers. And then an agent is necessary. But if you are querying small publishers directly and they offer to represent you, it would be hard to find an agent willing to help you with negotiating and to represent you, just because the payoff for them is going to be pretty small. They get, I think it's 15% of what you make is what they get. Whether that's advances or royalties. And small publishers offer pretty low advances, if any. And so there's probably not the financial incentive for them to spend the time representing you in negotiations with a small publisher. And if you have other questions, feel free to contact me. I'm very available through any of these channels. Thank you so much for having me, and happy writing.